Any questions of Mr. Turner? We'll move on. Randy, would you please share with us your
Thank you, Chair.
representation
Thank you, Chair
of
Fraser.
the agency?
First of all, my name is Randy Rentschler. I work for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I'd like to thank you and also your able staff, Ms. Dawson, for putting this together. In my brief moments here, I'm going to harken back towards, we get toward the end of this day, toward the beginning when you opened up this committee. And it really goes back to the governor's State of the State address. In the last 2 years, really, he's challenged the legislature to talk about the big issues that face this state, not just the liabilities of pensions and health care, but water, but lastly, transportation. He talks about the tens of billions of dollars that's a liability. And the question is, what is that really? So I dropped off this little graphic for you that tries to express what that liability means. And what it really is the condition of our pavement. As you can see in this graphic, pavement quality is related to time. And for a 15-year period, you would lose, let's say, 40% of the quality of your pavement, but in the next 2.5 years, you lose an additional 40% if you don't fix it. And if you fix it in the last bit, it costs you 40% more than if you fix it in the first. The average pavement quality is a numerical scale, 100 being the highest. The average in the Bay Area is 66. Only 6 cities of 101 plus 9 counties have a score above 80. Orinda, which is a community and Assembly Member Baker's district, is 48. A wealthy area has 48. Moraga, 53. The county of Sonoma, 45. So this is really a time bomb that's sitting out there. Every day it gets much, much more expensive to fix the roads. So this is one of these things. I know, 60% of the members in this building are new now. Within their time, this problem, if ignored, is going to get worse and worse and worse. I think that's what the governor was talking about. I think that's by far your largest challenge. We have a lot of congestion. We have people waiting hours to get to work on the freeways, can't get on our transit systems. But this is what touches everybody locally, and I urge you to find a way to solve this problem for your own local communities. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen, for coming today, and your presentation has been great. I'm going to move into public comment real quick. I have an individual that has a meeting, and I want to be able to make sure that he has an opportunity to speak, and then we'll move on to back to our regular agenda. Please state your name and who you represent, please.
Good afternoon. This is I'm Jim Arp with California Alliance for Jobs. I want to thank everyone that's spoken today. I think they have really done a great job of outlining just the scope of the problem that we're facing right now. Given that scope, I would urge this committee and the legislature really to consider among its many transportation action items this year at least 2 things. One would be a bill that would revisit what's going on with this annual adjustment with the Board of Equalization to see if there's a better way to do it. Basically, the wild swings that we're experiencing makes it very difficult for transportation agencies to plan anything, and so it's money that's what goes down this year will probably go up next year because the price of gas, everybody knows, isn't going to stay where it is, and these wild swings up and down make it very difficult to do any kind of consistent planning. I don't think that really changes the funding picture, though. It just makes that piece of funding a little bit more stable if you're able to accomplish that legislatively. The other thing is that we would really urge the legislature to do is look at this year as the time to really try to draw a line in the sand and get a toehold on this funding crisis that we're in. I don't think that we can fix it all this year, but our studies have shown that the voters get it. They are looking at transportation as one of the big problems in California, the state of their roads and the transit systems. No one is anxious to dig in their pockets to pay more money to fix these things, but they realize that just efficiencies, which are important, alone aren't going to get it done. And so we do need more funding. I think they are looking at the need for more funding if it's done with accountability and transparency, and if we do some real reforms with the money that we already have. If we can try to grapple that's a big heavy lift this year. But you know what? As it was very well pointed out by Randy Rinchler in very few words, pretty much told the picture. If we don't get going now, we are just digging ourselves into a deeper hole that we'll never get out of. Thank you very much.
And we'll have one more speaker, and then we'll go back to our regular agenda.
This is Bill Higgins with the California Association of Councils of Governments. I want to affiliate with what Mr. Harp said. I would just say that we're digging ourselves in a bigger pothole if we don't do something soon. We work with the League and CSAC and all 18 metropolitan planning organizations, and I would only add one additional point to echo what Mr. Rentschler said, and that when you focus on local roads, it's not only the motorist you're doing, you're actually helping with complete streets, with bicyclists and pedestrian safety and freight. Local roads do serve all modes of transportation. So it's a state and local system that works together that we need to fix, and taking a holistic solution to the transportation funding issue is what's needed. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, with that, we'll go back to our regular agenda items. Christopher Lee, Jennifer Whitting, and Sharon Scherzinger. We'll start off with Mr. Lee, who's the legislative analyst for California State Association of Counties.
Actually, I'm not Christopher Lee. I'm Jennifer Whiting with the League of California Cities, but with the chair's consent, we're going to flip our presentation. We have kind of a joint PowerPoint together.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us here today. We're happy to present to you the most recent findings of the 2014 California Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment. I hope that this PowerPoint helps give you a framework. You've been hearing from regions with very specific projects in mind. We look at this from a statewide point of view, and we're hoping you might find this helpful in your discussions this year. Thank you. So we looked at a few things in our needs assessment. We said this is the fourth reiteration of the needs assessment that we have done. We found about 10 years ago that cities and counties didn't really have a good way to show what the needs were on local streets and roads. So we took a look at that. By far, the biggest part of this is looking at the pavement condition index, or the pavement conditions. But we also look at a few other things, how much it will cost to maintain the pavements in addition to bridges and essential components. What is the overall funding shortfall in each of those areas? And we do have a few scenarios. They're not necessarily all-encompassing, but to give you an idea of what we think could help fix the shortfall. Local streets and roads are a huge component of California's network. Cities and counties maintain and own over 143,000 centerline miles in California. That's nearly 81% of California's centerline miles. Go ahead. So looking at 2008 was our first needs assessment. The pavement condition index of that first needs assessment was 68. The 2014 pavement condition is 66. It doesn't seem like a huge drop of 2%, but if we go forward just a few slides, this is what a 66 would look like. This is why it's so critical. We're really at the edge of the cliff. Several people have already talked about it. You know, the first few years you get somewhere, but it doesn't cost very much to repair it. And after those first few years, it costs a lot more. And that's what this shows. 66 is really on the slope. If we wait too much longer to act, to put in additional funding, we're going to go down more. It will cost us a lot more money. You can see in these two maps some trends from 2008 to 2014. So, of course, the green is in good condition. The blue is at risk or medium, I guess, condition. And then the red is poor condition. And you can see that the numbers had a pretty dramatic, or the colors had a pretty dramatic change over the 6-year period. And now 54 counties have an average PCI that is at risk or poor. I wanted to let you all know we have a few extra things, items that you can use in your districts as part of our report. One is a county map that shows city by city PCI. So if you're wondering how your county is, we have a website. You can go and take a look at that. Also, we handed out a pamphlet that has it by assembly, the shortfall by assembly district, and we're hoping that will be useful to you. So we've had a little bit of discussion today about stretching dollars and using them more wisely, and cities and counties have been meeting that call. You can see here it started as sustainable pavement strategies, but we kind of laugh. It's sustainable for the environment, also sustainable for money in the end. The top 4 sustainable pavement strategies that you see on this page, the reclaimed AC pavement, cold in place recycling, full depth reclamation, and pavement preservation, actually has an average savings of about 30% overall. We think that once these technologies spread to all cities and counties, we'll see another nearly $1 billion in savings just from these sustainable pavement strategies. Complete streets policies are fairly new and spreading. They're picking up speed. They're primarily bike and pedestrian facilities. We now have about 28% of agencies that have a complete streets policy. That number is growing. As you can see, it tripled since 2012. And an additional 21% have elements of the policy in place. What we don't have a good grasp on yet is how much that actually costs. Our agencies have reported costs associated with complete streets anywhere from $15 per square foot up to $700 per square foot. We think that swing is the difference between putting in a stripe for a bike lane and actually having to do right-of-way acquisitions. So depending on what street or road they're working on, there's a huge swing in cost. We also have unpaved roads in California still. If you're from an urban area, you might not realize that, but 4.4% of our total network is unpaved. And for on the gravel roads, they also have about $1 billion in need. So looking at how much funding is needed, if we were to reach the best management practices, right now we're at 66, best management practices are at about 84 PCI, we would need about $7.3 billion a year just for pavement. We know that's a big lift and probably not going to happen. So we looked at just maintaining the PCI of 66. And just for maintaining, we would need $3.3 billion per year. What we have is $1.6 billion per year. And you can see in this chart what happens with $1.6 billion per year. The line goes down. And in fact, I think this is a perfect example of why we have to act this year. If we wait 5 years to have additional investment, it will cost us an additional $11 billion just for that delay. Just a delay will cost us $11 billion. One shocking statistic for me that we found in this report is that if we do not act, 25% of our local streets and road system will be in failed condition in 10 years. And for a state as golden as ours, to me, that's just unacceptable and really shows that we have to act today. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Chris.
Chairman Fraser and members, Chris Lee with the California State Association of Counties. So I'm going to pick up where Jennifer left off and start talking about some of the other components that were included in our analysis of the funding needs for local transportation. So California has a huge number of bridges. About half of those bridges are owned by local cities and counties, about 12,000 of them. There's about 11,800 on the National Bridge Inventory, and there's about 3,500 smaller bridges, bridges shorter than 20 feet or not used for vehicular use, that are also considered as part of the local system. In the next slide, we have a chart that really shows, I think, a good reason why bridges are in such dire straits. 55% of California's existing bridges require replacement or rehabilitation, and you can see that's a function largely of the age of our existing infrastructure. So there's a huge number of bridges that are over 50 years old, which is typically about the lifespan for some of these facilities. So there are two scores that are used to determine what bridges are replaced and rehabilitated. And structurally deficient bridges have low scores for the deck or the superstructure, things like that, or just a structure that is not in a good condition to be able to carry loads, whereas functionally obsolete bridges have old geometry, so they might not be wide enough or have high enough clearances for today's modern uses. So a lot of the funding that cities and counties use for the bridges that we have comes from federal sources, and so what we did in the study was run scenarios based on different hypothetical annual funding levels, and what we found is that at the existing funding levels, which is about $300 million per year of funding, approximately a third of the bridges will be structurally deficient within a 10-year time horizon. In addition to the bridge needs, our report also includes an analysis of certain essential components that are also part of the local streets and roads network. So this is things like storm drains, curb and gutters, sidewalks, signals, street lights, traffic signs, and then things that had to be done to comply with other regulatory requirements. For instance, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the National Pollution Discharge, and I don't remember what ES stands for, but essentially the water quality for runoff that comes off of the roadways is becoming increasing cost for both local streets and roads as well as the state highway system. So we took the pavements, the bridges, and the essential components, which is the sidewalks and street lights and things of that nature, and came up with an overall picture of what the funding shortfall looked like. So as you can see here, the needs for pavement are $72.7 billion, but only $16.6 billion in funding are available over a 10-year period. There's a similar trend for the essential components, where a lot more of the funding actually comes from local sources than from state or federal sources, and that resulted in a $20.9 billion shortfall. And finally, for bridges, which are actually, as you can see from this chart, slightly better off in terms of funding, there's $4.3 billion in needs, but only $3 billion over that 10-year time horizon for funding. So when we add all of those components together, that's a $78.3 billion shortfall. And I know that this hearing is primarily about identifying the needs and sort of the status quo of the system, but just to put that in perspective, a $78.3 billion shortfall over 10 years would require an additional 54 cents per gallon per year at the pump based on the current levels of gasoline consumption. So this is truly a staggering number for local streets and roads. The next slide. So the funding trends are interesting because they vary a bit, as I mentioned, between the different components of the local streets and road system. So for pavements, which I believe is the chart that's up here right now, a lot of the funding that we rely upon comes from the state. So 54% of the existing funding, 13% of the funding comes from federal sources, and 34% comes from local sources. So the interesting thing about the gas tax, or the state funding, is that 90% of that state funding is coming from state subventions of gas tax funding. And that represents about 50%, as I mentioned, of the total funding. So we're heavily reliant on a funding source that is currently projected to decline over future years, both because of the purchasing power issues with inflation, but as well as due to increasing fuel efficiency from vehicles. So as we mentioned, we had our consultant run some different scenarios and try to come up with what are things that we can what are solutions that may or may not be on the table, and what sort of revenues would they raise? So the first one is new technologies to stretch existing dollars, which, as we mentioned, is things like the full depth recycling and using warm mix asphalt and other things that use technology to reduce the cost and stretch the dollar further. And based on a conservative estimate of where those technologies could successfully be applied, we estimated there's probably about $1 billion a year in funding that you could garner from those measures. If you were to raise the gas tax back to where it was in terms of purchasing power at 1994, it'd be about $1.7 billion a year for local streets and roads. Indexing the gas tax to CPI today over the next 10-year time horizon would raise revenues of about $50 million a year. A 10-cent per gallon gas tax increase would raise $1,300 million per year. A return of weight fees is another $1 billion. In summary, I think our last slide here. Our report is showing that the PCI is continuing to decline on local streets and roads, and that without intervention, the unfunded backlog is going to continue to grow. The upshot of that would be almost 25% of roads will be in failed condition within the 10-year time horizon, and there's similar conclusions for the safety-related and other essential components of the street and road system. So as we mentioned in the scenarios that Jennifer ran through, an additional $7.8 billion per year is needed to get us up to the best management practices level of maintaining our streets and road system. So with that, I think we can stop, and Jennifer and I can answer any questions that you might have from the local perspective.
Any questions so far? Seeing none, we'll move right on to Sharon Scherzinger. Would you please share with us who you represent?
Okay. Hello, my name is Sharon Scherzinger. I'm Executive Director for the El Dorado County Transportation Commission, and I'm also here on behalf of the Rural Counties Task Force. The Rural Counties Task Force represents the 26 rural counties in the state, the transportation planning agencies, extending all the way from Sacramento north to Oregon, down the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and then over a couple of them we have on the Central Coast. So a lot of geography. And I have a little bit of thunder left after today, so I'll make it brief. Rural counties, probably more than anyone else, rely on the partnership with the state of California to provide a transportation system that serves local communities, the state, and the county. Examples would be I-80 crossing the Sierras, 50, I-5 going north to Oregon, 101, Highway 1, the rail lines. Those are used both on a national level to get freight as well as for local circulation and for folks to come and visit. But because the rural counties have small populations and therefore can raise little funding, they are more highly dependent on the state and federal money than others. As you heard earlier, 54% of the funding comes from the state and 13% comes from the federal government to operate and maintain the transportation facilities we all use. Examples of the size of these counties would be our smallest county is Alpine, a little over 1,000 people. Modoc is 9,000, Sierra 3,000. The challenge with that is that if you want to have something like a local sales tax measure, you really don't have enough population to generate any significant revenue to basically be a self-help county. Things like congestion pricing are not particularly issues except if you're in a recreational area on the weekends. And we're very interested in participating in the road user charge pilot program to see how that plays out. We heard earlier from both Jennifer and Chris about the average pavement condition in the state, which is 66. In the rural areas of the state, it's 58. Rural counties have 14% of the total local road network in the state, 9% of the funding, and 6% of the population. As we heard earlier today, the highway user tax is by far the largest single funding source for cities and counties. We are concerned about the proposed action of the Board of Equalization to reduce the price-based excise tax by 7.5 cents per gallon. That's over $1 billion for local roads, a significant hit for our rural communities whose economies are based heavily on transportation, being tourism, agriculture, as well as resources like logging, fishing, mining, things like that. We appreciate the recognition of the Governor and the Speaker of the Assembly of the $59 billion in deferred maintenance on state highways and the $79 billion in local roads for the 10-year funding shortfall in local streets and roads. We've just completed a 5-county study surrounding the Tahoe Basin, looking at the travel between the Bay Area and Lake Tahoe. We saw on those routes that between 67 and 78% of those entering the basin are coming from outside those counties. So we depend highly on the interregional system. State highways and local roads also provide lifeline connections to medical care, jobs, food, and schools. Many rural areas only have one road in and out of their towns, and the failure of a transportation system can mean not just a small detour, but a multi-hour detour, as well as complete isolation for many days if the road is not repaired. Rural roads on the edge of urban areas also have a significant higher incidence of accidents and injuries because their system is not as complete and robust as it needs to be for the changes it's undergoing. We also have a higher proportion of senior citizens than anywhere else in the state, so we're anticipating that we're going to have a higher need for transit services than before. Due to the lower levels of funding in rural areas, we wait longer and accumulate the funds before we are actually able to build transportation projects. So any delay or lack of certainty in terms of those funds impacts us in a greater way than other parts of the state. When the funding eventually does return, projects will be more costly to restart. It impacts our labor base. Rural areas have a lower median income than the rest of the state, and we also have fewer job opportunities than a lot of other areas. In order to work on some of these things, we participated in the Governor's California Transportation Infrastructure Priority Effort, and we particularly support the Fix It First recommendation. In our communities, that's one of our #1 priorities typically. We look forward to working with the legislature and the governor to assure that the California taxpayers get the most for their money. We are leading efforts to develop performance measures for rural transportation systems to provide the public with clear, regular, and reliable information about how we're spending their money. We are available to you as a resource to work with you in any way that would be helpful. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Okay. Thank you so very much. It was very informative on local street and roads, the pavement index. Really appreciated, and the desperate need of how we need to move in that direction on responding to the funding. So thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to move back into public comment, and any members of the public that would like to share their wisdom at this time. Seeing none, moving up towards that arena. I'm going to wrap this up, and I want to also thank Chief Deputy Kome Ajisi here for staying the full length of the hearing. Your fortitude is appreciated, and also all the presenters that were here today. It was a fantastic opportunity for funding sources, how things are allocated, and hopefully we can move forward on a solution-based process moving forward. And just want to thank everybody again, our staff who put this together, all their hard work, and the members of the committees that showed today. And with that, we'll adjourn this hearing. Thank you.